It is Monday, July the 10th. Quiet before the storm. Midway, actually a little more than midway, but it's the official All-Star break week for the MLB. And one of the quietest weeks of the year in the sports betting world, but it's never quiet at WagerTalk.com. And it is $9 Monday. Get some advanced football best bets, some soccer best bets. Anything that's up there right now is just $9, even during the All-Star break with $9 Monday, WagerTalk.com. I am Steve Merrill, filling in for the Prez. He'll be back on Wednesday. And that is Brian Power filling in for Teddy Covers for the next 3 days. And Brian, the Bengals would be disappointed because it's not a manic Monday. It's the exact opposite. So it's drama free. They threw Steve and Bryan in this next couple of days. We'll be here both Monday and Tuesday. We do have the Home Run Derby tonight. We have MLB All-Star Game tomorrow on Tuesday. And then they get Wednesday and Thursday off. So they'll be back regular games on Friday. But Brian, we still have a great show. Multiple different sports we'll be talking about today on Monday.
Yeah. Can you believe this, Steve? 47 days from now, we'll all be getting ready for the first college football game to kick off this season. Bryan Leonard is here today. He's going to be talking returning starters, pros and cons in college football. He's up first in the What Bettors Learn segment. I'll be taking a look. As you mentioned, it is, of course, the MLB All-Star break. Contenders and pretenders from the first half. What we've learned, what we can maybe expect over the second half of the season. Of course, with MLB on break, that doesn't mean there's not other sports to bet on, guys. Like soccer, my good buddy, Nick Borman from Stoppage Time. He'll be joining us, taking us to the pitch. La Liga MX down in Mexico for tonight. And then we'll look 2 days from now, Wednesday, MLS here on the domestic front, New England Revolution against Atlanta United. No Prez here, so maybe we could sneak in a little congrats to the U.S. for last night's Gold Cup victory over Canada. And a BS segment, we'll be taking a look at multiple betting accounts and, how you can navigate that with in case if you've been limited somewhere. So
definitely some actionable info. Yeah, we got college football. We've got MLB big picture second half information. As you mentioned, Nick does soccer. He also does Wimbledon. He wanted to talk some Wimbledon today, he said, but that's not quite lined up right now. We got some early games, some other things not decided. But don't forget tennis, soccer, golf, auto racing, props galore, baseball still around the corner, and a lot of football. And there are week one football best bets up right now at WagerTalk.com. And because it's $9 Monday, you get a substantial discount, and you can lock in that line value right now, $9 Monday, WagerTalk.com. And Brian Power, let's bring in Bryan Leonard, another Brian at WagerTalk.com, and let's take an advanced look at some college football. And Brian, might get your thoughts on the way out, too, on those pretenders and contenders before Brian Power and I break it down on baseball as well, because you're a baseball guy. But first, let's look at college football. I didn't realize it was less than 50 days. When Brian said that, it was a little bit of a surprise to me. It seems very, very recent, 47 days, and right around the corner, less than 2 months. Ralph Michaels was on a couple weeks ago with me. I believe it was the Friday show 2 weeks ago, and Ralph had some returning starter data. The college football guide is going to be on his page at WagerTalk.com for free. Just a fantastic free guide, over 130 teams in 1A football. Follow Ralph also at Cal Sports LV on Twitter for updated information all football season. But Bryan Leonard, Ralph talked about how it's trickier than ever with returning starters, right? The transfer portal, you don't have to sit out a year when you go from a 1A school to another 1A school. The COVID stuff just screwed everything up. Guys get 5 or 6 years now. We talked about production numbers. So I'm really curious, Brian, to get your take on what you do now with returning starter information. It's a lot different than when all of us started back in the 1990s.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. I moved to Las Vegas in 1997, and so did Ted Savransky. And we happened to go to a handicapping seminar out here, and that's how we met. We've been friends since, and it's been a pleasurable experience being able to work with Teddy and yourself. We've gone back a lot of years, and Brian's a great addition to the site. And but when we started years ago, it's been 40 years or so for me in this. When I came to Vegas, I met Mike Lee, who used to work for Jim Feist. He was on what do they call it?
Proline.
TV.
Proline.
There you go. TV show across the nation, the biggest out there, and that's where you knew him from. And so I got to meet Mike, and Mike handicaps a lot like I do. He's a numbers guy, and everything he does is numbers wise. And he was the first one that I ever talked to about returning starters. Back then, people didn't pay any attention to it. Well, this is back in 97, and it had a lot of value. back in 97. And since then, everybody and their brother plays into the returning starter angle. And you had mentioned it. You talked about with the COVID situation and now with the transfers and all. You could have 10 different people that you follow that do this for a living, and they can all come up with 10 different returning starters. So it's tougher to do now than it was in the past. And to be totally honest with you, I don't think it has the value in it. I just got my Phil Steele magazine the last week, and he has his returning starters. Mark Lawrence has his returning starters for his magazine. You talked about Ralph Michaels and that. So everybody's got something a little bit different. But I went through and I looked last year based on the teams that had the most experience. So it's not just returning starters. It was total plays, guys that played at another place and transferred over. So it's not just returning starters, but it was experience. And I took the teams that came into the season with the top 10 experienced teams. These are teams that normally we'd want to bet on. You want to bet on them more early than later, but you want to bet on them because they should have a little bit of advantage. And those teams went 64, 60, and 4 against the spread. So slight positive. You probably would have been expecting a little bit more. And I said, it's starting to catch up and everybody knows about it. Well, just for fun, I went back and I looked at the teams that started the year, the least experienced teams. And I went back to the last 10 least experienced. So we're figuring these teams would have a terrible record against the spread. There were actually 65, 60, and 2, slightly better than the teams that had all the experience. So don't get overly excited here if you've got a team that's got a lot of experience going against a team that doesn't, because it's a different world than it was in 1997. And we've got different stats to go by. Guys are able to go in and out of these places, and it's a different situation. So I have found when everybody, like if you were to get the opening lines that came out earlier this year, find a place that has that. I'm sure we have it on our website, our line service. Follow how that line has changed. Many times you'll see a game that's like minus 18. By the time you get to the game, it's minus 24 because they had a big advantage in the returning starters. Well, that was nice if you got the 18. But if you're getting into 24, all the value is past you. The value is now on the opposite team. So don't be afraid to go against line movements because guys bet early in the season. The pro bettors, they're playing lines. If they make a line 24, the line's 18, they're going to bet it. But once it gets to 23, they're probably not betting it anymore. So that's something to take advantage of. So if you've got the returning starters angles and you haven't bet them yet, chances are all the value's out of there now. Just wait for that to go on. When everybody reads all these magazines and sees all that coming back, and then day of the game, day before the game, play the other way, I think you can do better.
Yeah, Bryan, I just wanted to ask a question. The team for me that kind of just changed the narrative about returning starters last year and broke the model was USC, right? Because there were a lot of power rating systems last year that had USC low because they didn't have a lot of actual returning starters from the previous year's team. But we know how they hit the transfer portal. And to Steve's point earlier, that has been such a game changer. So you look around, it's not just the same people back. If you're bringing quality people in from other schools, I mean, you're right. You made the point, like different people have it marked in different ways, but it was USC for me was the team that wasn't quote unquote as experienced coming into 2022, but obviously got off to that great start, would have made the playoff if not for their horrific defense. But is there a team like that you've uncovered maybe this year that is more talented or has more experience than they're being given credit for?
Well, one of them, I went to Akron University. In Akron last year, they brought in a legitimate head coach, and they didn't have the wins, but they had a winning spread record. And I think a team like an Akron, who brings their quarterback back, they've got some guys on that team that got better as the season went on. They actually gained more yardage than they allowed in MAC play last year. And still, they only won 2 games all season long. So that's a team I'm looking to bet on. It's a team that comes back that had experience as the season goes on. They started playing better. They got the head coach back. They know exactly what they want. The quarterback's back. That's something I want to take a look at. But you mentioned USC on the one side. Remember NC State last year? NC State was the team that everybody wanted. They were getting all these great players coming back. They had a ton of experience. NC State on the season goes 4-9 against the spread. That's how I'm talking about being able to wait for everybody to bet it up, come back the other way.
Yeah, and Bryan Leonard, that chart that they put up while you were talking, the returning starter chart, I believe, is from Ralph's guide at WagerTalk.com, goldsheet.com as well. And it's a good starting point, right? You see the green, you see the red. Ralph loves to use green, for good, red for bad. And, a couple of jumps out of you, like UAB, 6 total returning starters, no offensive lineman, no quarterback. Texas State, 7, no lineman, no quarterback. Ralph and I talked about this a bit the other week, too. One way to dig a little bit deeper sometimes into the data is to maybe look at offensive line. And that is somewhere you don't get quite as many transfers. The skill guys can really make a difference overnight. It's like in college basketball, 1 or 2 guys can be 40% of your offensive production in basketball. And obviously that's the same with a quarterback or a receiver or running back. But I always feel like the offensive line is something that gets a little bit underlooked. Maybe, Brian, do you think there's still value in looking at offensive line, like on the trenches maybe, of some of these lesser teams, especially like in the MAC, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's value in looking at all of it. I think that's why it's out there, and the only thing is everybody knows the same thing as you do. And
right.
when you're trying to bet, you're trying to find things that are not included in the line, which gives you an advantage. Brian's a MAC guy; he knows the MAC really well. I know the MAC well. A lot of people don't care about them. All they care about is the SEC and the Big Ten and the Big 12. Those are the ACC. Those are the teams that want to back because they know those teams. Well, if you know the Sun Belt and you know Conference USA and you know the MAC, those are where you can make some money. So, pay attention to the guys who follow those conferences. And I know, Brian, I've seen him, some of his posts. He goes to the baseball games. He goes to the football games in that area. Trig has been great at that. Trig follows all that. So that gives people an advantage that you won't find other places. So just because the game is on TV doesn't mean you want to bet it. You want to bet on the game that has more value. And I don't care what is on TV. I just want to be able to get as much value as possible. And that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's changed since we all started in the 1990s was Bryan Leonard was the most excited human being on earth when the MAC came on the board in the late 90s. I vividly remember that. And you made a kill, and you still do well, but yeah. I remember it was just free picking back in the 90s. You guys remember when over-unders were only on a couple TV games every week. Speaking of TV games, you could even get college football over-unders during the regular season. A lot of novice, new bettors probably think that's insane, but that's the world we lived in back in the day. But the good news is now everything's on TV. Everything has over-unders, props, etc. And one other thing I'll point out real quick, and I want to get Bryan Leonard's thought on baseball on the way out, is returning starting data less important than ever, probably because of the transfer portal. But even back in the 90s and 2000s, you always had to take it with a grain of salt because the power teams, some teams just reload. They don't have to rebuild. And a team like Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, they can lose, 10, 12, 15 starters, and the backups coming in are still NFL caliber, whereas at a MAC school or a WAC school or SWAC school or something, that might not be the case. Another reason, tread lightly, but it's still a great starting point to dig deeper for research. And that WagerTalk College Football Guide, completely free. Ralph Michaels did a great job. Follow him on Twitter at CalSportsLV. All right, Bryan Leonard, I'm going to ask Brian Power this right after you get off, but I want to give you a chance on the way out. It is baseball. Midseason was about a week ago. We're at the All-Star break, though. Pretenders, contenders, the floor is yours.
Well, the only thing, like people keep talking about the Cardinals and the Padres and these they're going to put it all together. There's something wrong with those teams, especially San Diego. You've got all that money you've spent out there, and they still can't win. The teams that I want to bet on are teams that have younger players coming up. The Baltimore Orioles, every couple of weeks they bring up another guy that's supposed to be a fixture for their team for the rest of the season. They've got some pitchers in the minors that we've heard about for years. They can't even break through and play. So like a team like the Orioles, I think is legit. Obviously the Braves are the team to beat. At least in my mind, they're the team to beat. When you have money like the Dodgers do, Dodgers can always pick up that free agent contract and get there at the time. But Brian, before the show, Brian was talking a little bit about Miami. It's very similar with Miami. Coming into the season, you were either a Miami fan or you weren't. Miami doesn't have big name players on that team, but they know how to win with a pitching staff. And I play fantasy baseball. I always try to load up my team with a lot of Miami players. They're not going to go in and get a ton of wins on this team, but they know how to recruit pitching. Cleveland knows how to recruit pitching. So teams like that are some teams that we can make some money on, especially when they bring in younger guys that nobody knows about. And half of the Cleveland pitching staff right now are guys that didn't even start the season in the rotation. So those are how we can make some money betting on baseball. But I think the Braves are the team to beat, and it's tough to go against them right now. They're looking really good. But, hey, we'll see. We'll see what happens, and maybe somebody will come out of nowhere and be a surprise for us.
Bryan Leonard, obviously, if you hail from Mac Country, you're one of the greats. We think, I have a lot to say about those contenders and pretenders. A lot of the same things. Bryan read my mind. Two Bryans thinking is one here. Bryan, thanks for being on. Is there anything you'd like to promote before we bid you adieu?
No, probably won't have any plays until baseball starts on Friday, unless I do find some lines in college football. In the NFL, I think are going to move. Then I'll put those up. But yeah, it's a good week for everybody to catch your breath a little bit. I took a vacation last week. I'll be very fresh when we get to second half of the baseball season.
Yeah, second half of the baseball season and less than 2 months away from the football season as well. So not a bad time to do some research this week, take advantage of a light baseball card this week. But once again, $9 Monday, WagerTalk.com. Numerous best bets for week one college and pro football are loaded right now by several cappers. Also, numerous free plays. If $9 is too much, check out Free Play Monday at WagerTalk.com as well. Bryan, I want to ask you now about baseball because we're at the All-Star break. It's more than 81 games. That was about a week and a half ago. So we're more past the midway point, but this is a good stopping point with 4 days off here to reflect on how we're going to attack the next 3+ months into November. World Series goes into the first week of November, several months into the football season. Bryan Leonard touched on some teams I think you and I are going to touch on as well. It is interesting. The Rays got off to a historically fast start. Even when they did so, they still were never really the favorite to win the World Series. The Texas Rangers were my play-on team when the season began, but I've got to be honest, I didn't think they'd be this good out of the gate from that run differential. The Orioles, Bryan Leonard mentioned the Orioles. My former Baltimore Orioles, now my Baltimore Orioles, because my Washington Nationals are so bad now. But, the Orioles are a team everyone's been waiting to fade. They were sellers last year despite being in the wild card contention. They're even maybe stronger this year now. The best moneymaker in baseball for 2+ years. So what have you learned? And not necessarily last night, but what have you learned in the first 3 months of the baseball season? And what do you think, more importantly, is going to happen in the next 3 months?
Well, I have a feeling you're going to be able to get the answer to this question, Steve, because we've mentioned them already a couple times. But other than Houston, Atlanta, and the Dodgers, do you know what team has the most wins over the last 200 regular season games?
I mean, I think it's probably the Orioles, right?
It is the Baltimore Orioles. Again, Baltimore Orioles. And you touched on it too. Most profitable team to bet on since the start of last year. They're number 2 overall this year, trailing only the Reds. They were runaway winners in the net units department in 2022. And what this bettor learned yesterday is kind of what apparently you and Bryan Leonard already knew. This team's not going away. I thought they were not going to sweep Minnesota, but boy, they showed up. They pounded the Twins. And you talked about that Rays great start, Steve. So, when you get off to a start, like a historic start like that, you would think you're going to build some, space between you and your next contender. Baltimore's only 2 games behind Tampa Bay, despite Tampa Bay's incredible first month of the season. This Orioles team is absolutely legit. They're not going to be sellers this year. And for me, they are an absolute 100% contender in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing for me about baseball is that they play 162 games, and the way you win in the regular season is probably less important than any other sport as opposed to what transfers to winning in the postseason, because it comes down to, obviously, like basketball and hockey, it's a 7-game. It used to be 5-game, and now let's just say 7 for the last 2 rounds. It's 7, best of 7. But like in hockey, a goaltender can dominate, but in baseball, a pitcher has to dominate. They're half the game. They're over half the game in the playoffs. And in the regular season, you got to go with your number 4 and 5 guys. And some teams maybe have a better 4 or 5 guy. They win some extra games because of that. That gets them in the playoffs. But those guys aren't going to start probably in the postseason for the most part. And then also offensive momentum plays such a role in the regular season that a team like the Reds, for example, they win 12 straight the other week, still had a negative run differential in the season after 12 straight wins, barely a 500 team. The Rays were kind of like that as well at one point, a lot of offense. And that's why Houston won the World Series last year, right? The bullpen was incredible. Their pitching was solid from top to bottom. So, Bryan, I'll ask you, of all the teams that are contenders right now, I mean, none of them, to be honest, jumped out to me as a pitching dominant team. I mean, if the Mets were healthy, Scherzer and Verlander 10 years ago would probably be the team if they could make the playoffs. I've always said that. My Washington Nationals in 2019, I remember saying if they make the playoffs in August, they're going to win the whole thing because they had Scherzer, they had Strasburg, they had 3-4 good starters, but we didn't even know if they were going to make the playoffs. Braves, maybe. Texas is a team I talked about. If you look just roughly right now at the best ERAs in baseball, 5th and 6th, Eovaldi and Dunning, both are 5th and 6th overall. So maybe Texas is for real. And can you imagine, Bryan, if Jacob deGrom was available, the best pitcher in baseball, maybe?
I know.
That's what's impressive about Texas, right? They're doing it without one of the best players in baseball.
And it's Dane Dunning, who you mentioned, has stepped into the role of DeGrom. And he's the guy to watch because he's actually really overperformed if you're somebody who tries to like analyze expected ERA versus actual ERA. I think there's like almost a 2-point gap for him. Well, it's one of the largest in baseball. But those wins, and that's something we're going to touch on here in a minute, those wins are already in the bank. And so, I mean, in order for Texas to, potentially win this division, they need something like that, right? They're like, oh my God, DeGrom goes down. That could be a season killer, but in comes Dunning, to kind of save the day. I think they've only lost, once or twice since he officially joined the rotation. So, he's done a great job. One thing with Baltimore, just to double back to them, because you brought up starting rotations, that is a concern. Once they get to the playoffs, I don't love their rotation. That's part of the reason why I was so skeptical. Like, I don't love their rotation at all. But what's fascinating is, don't the Twins have the best ERA in baseball? Offhand, while you were talking, and you look at that, and they're a team who doesn't have the wins in the bank. I would be very nervous if I was the Minnesota Twins, who were, had a solid run differential, and yet could only go 5, dominated over the weekend by the aforementioned Orioles. The Twins never get good starting pitching. And they've gotten tremendous starting pitching this year. And look at the results. They're kind of just a 50-50 proposition. That's not good for them, in my opinion, moving forward.
Yeah, and Bryan, once again, to show how offense is what wins in the regular season, like I said earlier, these are the best OPS, on base plus slugging. I think it's a great overall metric, kind of combines everything, power along with getting on base. And Atlanta Braves first, Rangers second, Dodgers third, Rays fourth, Angels fifth, Red Sox sixth, D-backs seventh, Cardinals eighth. The reason I mentioned the Cardinals there is because they're like the AL Central with the Twins. The NL Central is such a terrible division. It's going to be a one bid division. The Reds are 9 games up now. I talked about how they were barely above 500. They have gone on a nice run the last month or so. But the Cardinals, Bryan, are still dead last, 14 games below 500, 11 and a half back, but they're 11 out of the wild card. If there's one team, it's the Giants and the Cardinals always find a way to overachieve, overperform. I mean, could the Cardinals be a play-on team in the second half for you?
Maybe they're not going to make up the gap. I mean, even in that more NL Central, I think it's over. But maybe, I don't know though. To me, it's not the Cardinals that I'm so looking like. If you're looking for a team that currently has a losing record that might make a run, it's a team that Bryan Leonard mentioned. It's actually the San Diego Padres, who have the 4th best run differential. Or pardon me, the 3rd best run differential in the National League. Only the Braves and Dodgers. Yet the Padres are 4 or 5 games under 500. I think I don't have it in front of me. It's something like that. They had a good weekend against the other underachieving team, the Mets. So the Padres, who have been huge money burners, Bryan Leonard touched on it. They came in with that huge payroll, favorites to win the NL West. They obviously had a very poor first half, but to me, that run differential suggests that this is probably a team that's going to win more games. They, in terms of run suppression, that's not a problem for them. They're number 1 at home. They give up the fewest runs per game at home. So to your earlier point about, pitching, getting it done, I think the San Diego Padres are a team, even in a division that's loaded, could make a potential playoff push and go from sub 500 to the postseason.
Yeah, they're 4th in their own division right now, 4 games below 500, yet they have the 3rd best run differential in the entire National League, and they're 4th in their own division. But the Diamondbacks and Giants positive ahead of them, too. They're now 8.5 behind the Dodgers, 6 out of the wild card, the last wild card spot. Of course, an extra team the last couple of years gets that wild card, which gives a team. It really could be a 4 playoff division with those 4 teams. We'll have to see how it plays out. But a lot of baseball to talk about still the next few months. And Bryan and I, maybe I'll touch on a little baseball tomorrow on Tuesday as well here on the show while we're together again and throughout this week before it returns on Friday. Let's see if Nick Borman would like to join us, though, because there's other sports, actionable info and other sports here in the next couple of days. Baseball, tennis. Nick does golf as well. And Nick, great to have you. I know you wanted to talk some Wimbledon. It was kind of tricky to have anything to talk about today, but we're going to look at a couple of soccer matches. Give us something to look at this week here at MLS on Wednesday. But let's start a little more current here on Monday for soccer.
Yeah, hey Steve, hey Bryan. Yeah, thanks for having me. Soccer is still in full swing. MLS has been going strong. We have a weird year this year where both the MLS and the Liga Mexico's Liga MX will take a month-long break and play kind of a World Cup style tournament, which is coming up in just 2 weeks' time. So it's kind of what I wanted to talk about here with both leagues and preview a match going on in both. So tonight in Mexico, we do have a big matchup. You got Club Leon hosting Pachuca, and these are two very good teams. Pachuca won the Apertura season just last year. Leon literally just won the Champions League less than 2 months ago. So these are two good teams. They're battling out. I see this coming as a tight battle between two very good sides. Bryan knows when we do our soccer shows, you get a lot of good teams playing each other. You tend to think it's going to be high scoring, but we see a lot more unders in this type of situation. So first of all, very heated rivalry. Last season, we saw a total of 3 red cards between the two meetings. And over their last 3 get-togethers, there's been a total of 4 red cards, plus an additional 18 yellows in those 3 meetings. So if you're into the cards market, I would definitely recommend taking a look at what the bookmakers are offering there and looking at the over, because you're going to assume there's going to be something along the lines 6-7 cards in this meeting tonight. But I personally like the under here. Leon was excellent at home in the most recent season, the Clausura last year. Defensively, very tough to score on. They allowed only 6 goals in 9 home matches, plus over 4 Champions League matches. They allowed a total of just 2 goals, which includes beating LAFC, the reigning MLS Cup champions, of course, and UANL Tigres, which is the reigning Liga MX champion. So obviously 2 very good teams and still playing good defense against them. Expected goals allowed showed an average of just 0.93 per match during that run. And then Pachuca, more known as an offensive team than a defensive one, but they don't score nearly as many when they face some of the better teams in the league, which obviously Leon is one of those. They scored just 1 goal against Monterrey and 1 goal against UANL last season. Still, they did perform very well on the road last year. Twice, though, as I say that, they allowed 4 goals. Obviously not good in there, but throw out those anomalies. In their other 7 away matches, they allowed a total of just 5 goals. So between these matches, or between these sides, last thing I'll throw in is both meetings last year finished under this total, and 4 of the last 6 between them have finished under this total. So right now you can get under 2.75, which sounds like an odd number, but Bryan knows this means it's just a split line. So you're actually taking half of your wager on under 2.5 and half of your wager on under 3. So if there are 3 goals scored in this match, you're actually only losing half your wager. Any other result is self-explanatory, but under 2.75 goals I like in Liga MX tonight.
A low scoring and perhaps feisty fixture down in Mexico, says Nick. And let's move back here to the domestic front. Nick, I know one of your favorite leagues, MLS. We got the New England Revolution taking on Atlanta United in 2 days from now. This goes down on Wednesday. What do you got here for us?
Yeah, MLS has been great this year. And, the tricky thing this year, as I mentioned with this Leagues Cup, is they're cramming games in. We don't see nearly as many midweek games as we are seeing in the MLS. And that is definitely having an effect, obviously more on road teams, unlike, traveling midweek in, let's say, England, where, the entire country is like the size of one state. Traveling across the United States is quite the journey. But here, the match I want to talk about is we got New England Revolution facing Atlanta United. I mentioned the short rest. Everybody's playing on the short rest right now. I really am worried about Atlanta here in this situation, though, with tired legs. Both teams are coming in. You have Atlanta. They're going to be on the road again, back-to-back matches. They won 1-0 at Montreal, which has been a rare thing for them this year. That was only their second road win of the season. They won their very first away match at Charlotte, but they were winless on the road in their last 9 until Saturday. Now they got to travel again here in just 3 days' time. Defense is where they've been struggling, and during that run of 9 straight games without a win, they allowed 22 goals, 6 of them with at least 2 goals. Their offense hasn't been that great either, as they only scored 10 goals in those 9 matches, and only twice did they net at least 2 goals. So it's a team that really does struggle away. And most MLS teams, you'll kind of get that vibe for as if you watch through the season. New England, last week, I wrote an article previewing their match with the Red Bulls. suggesting we might see both teams get on the score sheet. It happened, but really the reason I did that was, New England's a very offensive-minded team. They scored 36 goals this year, 4th in the league. Like most MLS teams, most of that has come at home. They've scored 23 at home, including scoring at least 2 in 7 of 10 matches. And overall, lately, the Rev are one of the hottest teams scoring goals of late. In their last 8 matches overall, they've scored 17 goals, including 6 of them netting at least twice. So can't figure out where I'm going here. I like goals, and I like them specifically on the New England side. Right now, you can get over 1.5 goals, minus 145 over at DraftKings. For what it's worth, I also do think New England money line itself is the right play, and that's a little cheaper price, minus 115. But personally, I do like the over 1.5 goals just in case it ends up being some sort of a 2-2 type of a thing. Because, again, we do have 2 tired teams here on short rest, but the traveling team, that much worse. So I really like New England to get on the score sheet a couple times this one, guys.
Nick, you alluded to it. You and I obviously spent the entire soccer season talking, European, all the European domestic leagues. We not so you do MLS, I do not do MLS, but I know from talking to you on Stoppage Time, every week that you have a ton of success in MLS. Is there anything specific that the listeners should know about betting on MLS versus the European? Like, why do you find that you have more success in MLS than maybe the European domestic leagues sometimes?
Honestly, that's a great question. I feel it's because the level of competition is very close with one another. For what I mean by that is, if you go look in the Premier League, the top to the bottom, you got Manchester City, one of the best teams in the world, right? And then you get a team like Bournemouth or Leicester. Well, they're not that bad of a team, but they were relegated this year. There's a big gap, and you're going to see lines of minus 2 goals, minus 2.5 goals, sometimes higher. In the MLS, my rule of thumb is if you get a line that's more than a goal, no MLS team is that much better than any MLS team. It's just a general rule I have where it's just too much right away, and I immediately look to fade those. It's not always like, automatically I'm going to play it, but I will always take the time to look at that match first and go, this is probably too much. And now, honestly, LAFC is one of those teams that garners that kind of respect and attention. They've been awful. They're in a terrible rut right now. They've won one of their last, I think, 9 games. So it's an example of that they just can't get over the hump and score more than they need to. So I think that's a big reason we see that in the MLS is just the teams are not that far apart in talent. So I like to take the dogs. Almost every line in the MLS, you're going to see the home team favorite. It's very rare to see a road team favorite. In fact, I tweeted this out, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. At the time, there were only 7 instances the entire season. We're talking 2/3 of the way through the season. 7 times had a road team been favorite, and they were at the time were 1-6 against the spread. And then whatever game that was that night that had happened had lost too. So 1-7 against the spread, road team's favorite, being a favorite. It's tough to travel on the road. You don't see it very often. But taking plus goals in the MLS, it's worth a look. There's a lot of teams that are just not worthy of laying any sort of number, I guess you could say, when it comes to separating these teams.
Well, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think the lower level sports, whether it's even college basketball or anything, it's tougher to travel. So, it's a lower level league as opposed to the NFL or the NBA or not. So I think it makes sense. Even though maybe crowds are smaller, you get more of a travel disadvantage. So that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on in soccer MLS. Nick does soccer. He's up almost 30 units the past couple of months, 2.5 months at WagerTalk.com in soccer alone. But Nick, you also do golf. You do tennis. I know Wimbledon's going on. Tell us what else you have playing. There's no baseball for a few days, but there's a lot of bets to be made and a lot of money to be made with other sports at WagerTalk.com.
Yeah, we're in the second week of Wimbledon, so there's we're in the quarterfinal stage at this point. So the big names are in the matchups. And this is where you usually get the better dog fights, matches that'll actually go 4 or 5 sets. So that's going on for the next couple of days, and then of course golf in full swing. We have big tournament this week, Scottish Open, in preparation for next week's last major of the year, the Open Championship. I always load those packages up on Monday night, so that'll be available at the end of the day Monday. But then I'm just getting ready for this Big Leagues Cup tournament, which is new, but I'm excited to really break that down with all MLS teams and all Mexico's Liga MX. In general, Liga MX is stronger. The Champions League, which is like the CONCACAF Champions League, is the version of Mexico versus MLS and some other little small countries, but Mexico has held the advantage big time over the years. So I'm going to keep that in my mind. I'm trying not to be biased. I want the MLS to do well, but results are what they are, right? So that's what I got going on right now, and hopefully we can find some winners in these other sports.
It's great. Golf, tennis, and soccer all going on right now. Nick Borman, a great way to diversify your portfolio and add some value as well to your bankroll. And speaking about winning, Brian Power, BS time, BS segment time. We got a good question. You wouldn't think there's any BS Monday with you and me hosting the show, but
No.
there's still always BS. And first of all, we need some questions. I'm going to dig through, try to find the ones from the last week or so, but sometimes Prez hides them from me. He's not back till Wednesday. So I need a good question for tomorrow on Tuesday, because tomorrow, Brian Power and myself, Steve Merrill, will be back doing the show again. So let's have a great BS question. You can leave it in the live chat, but I prefer if you can leave it in the comments below after the show. That way we can go back and check them. And we can also reply back that way if we don't use it on the show. We'll be happy to give you an answer still. So any kind of handicapping question, betting question in general, put them in the comments below. We get to them on the show on a daily basis. And this one's a general question, and I'm not sure there's necessarily a great answer for it, but it's a good problem to have. Let's put it that way. And this is from Barry, and Barry's asking us right here, Barry Gigliotto Lidu, how do you keep multiple betting counts active when so many sports books seem to limit winners? And Barry went a little more detailed on YouTube. It was from last Friday, I believe, and he was saying he's had numerous accounts over the years. He's limited 98% of the time after winning, and he said it seems to be getting harder to keep accounts open. The tricks he used to use, basically, he was saying, do not work anymore. And Brian, I'll throw it to you. I don't necessarily have a great answer. First of all, it's a good problem to have. Congratulations, Barry. That means you're winning.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating. And this is actually one of the reasons I've transitioned the last 10, 15 years to the financial markets as well, because it's a bigger version of the sports betting markets worldwide, and they don't limit winners. It's a zero-sum game. That's what I like about trading in the financial markets, because this is a problem you will run into when you win. And you can make an argument with legalization here in 30 plus states now, FanDuel, DraftKings are the big two, but there's a lot of other players as well, that it would be too big to fail, right? And they would have enough balance. But I am concerned, Brian, that it's heading the opposite direction in the legal U.S. market, where there's so much square novice money coming in with same game parlays, and sucker bets, and they're willing to lay 25 cents on baseball lines, that it might be becoming tougher for guys to keep accounts open. So if you run into this problem, any general advice, and I'll probably come up with something and follow up.
Okay, well, first of all, remind me, after the show to stick around. I'll be asking you stock tip questions. Now I know that. That's good. Number two, the last time I ran into this issue. Well, first of all, like you said, it's a good problem to have, right? I mean, one of the reasons you have multiple accounts is in case if this happens at one of them, right? You could still go. I mean, this isn't a great answer, but and I'm sure Barry knows this. If you're betting a market that it's not like one of the common, if it's not like NFL, like for instance, I wouldn't play 9 NBA Summer League games at every account if you've got good information. If you're going like 8-1 every day in the NBA Summer League, somebody's going to take notice, like what's going on here. So, maybe I know it's tough, and you have to show some restraint, but just, don't bet stuff like that at every account because you're just exposing yourself to, possible limitation there.
Yeah, Brian, that's an excellent point. I'll piggyback on that one. First of all, for the new viewers out there that don't understand this question, you're not going to get limited bet in the NFL. It's these smaller off sports that are going to cause problems. College basketball, Brian Power, myself, Steve Merrill, we do the college basketball show numerous times during the season. We both do extremely well in college basketball. The limits on a side is maybe 5,000. In NFL, it's 50,000. They won't blink an eye, right? So I don't think you're ever going to get limited from winning on NFL sides or totals. And I'd like to know if anybody has been, because you don't hear that happening too often. Because there again, it's a big enough market, and it's also a sharp enough market where the odds makers really aren't too concerned. All the information is known. It's like the Super Bowl. That's why they take $1 million bets on the Super Bowl. There's no inside information. They're not going to take $1 million bet on a MAC basketball game from Brian Power or myself, Steve Merrill, a small conference game. So it's depending on the sport, now if you're doing these off sports as well, like tennis, soccer, the markets are huge internationally. You might get limited easier in one of the U.S. books, but if you're one of our international viewers that can use one of the international books, you're probably a little bit better off there as well. But like Brian said, if you want to play a bigger amount, you need to spread it around multiple books. If you stay under that $500 mark, I think you're probably okay for the most part. And you're going to maybe get noticed eventually. But if you're putting in a couple $1,000 plays on these off sports, it's not going to take long. Even if you're just lucky and win, they might think you're sharp. So if you want to impress your friends and you don't have an edge, you want to get limited, just put some big plays in on small sports. Hope you get lucky and you'll get limited pretty fast. You can tell your friends you were barred from the sports books, and you can start a nice marketing career as a professional sharp, even if you don't know what you're doing. But Brian, it's excellent advice. Have multiple outs, first of all, so you get line value. And if you like a play and you want to put 1,000 on it, maybe put it down for $300 at 3 different books instead, and you might last a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I remember the last time that it was the WagerTalk East Coast meet and greet. I remember the group, all of us there. We were on one of the great one-day runs of all time during the NCAA tournament. And they finally told us, no, we're not interested. You can't bet that much by the morning of the second day. But guess what? Our buddy had an online account right there. He had his computer and we bet it there. So, obviously, one place turns you down, just go to another place. Just, you don't want to get turned down everywhere because then you have trouble. But it sounds like Barry's doing quite well for himself.
Yeah, once again, a good problem to have. It is frustrating, though. Barry's been doing it for a while, and he's been winning, and he's kind of figured out how to get around it. He says it's not working as well, and I think it is going to get trickier down the road. One idea that came to mind, though, as we were talking about this, Bryan, is, in-game betting, same-game parlays are the two big things now. Everybody's doing it. So I think if you're doing either one of those things, you can kind of sneak in under the radar. I'm not sure there's a lot of edges with parlays. We've had that as a better strategy segment question. I mentioned it a few weeks ago. Over the last 30 years in Vegas, 30% of the household is parlays, 5% is everything else, which is basically just the mathematical edge that they have at minus 110. It's 4.5%. So parlays are not the strategy long-term, but I want to ask you about in-game betting. There is an advantage there, maybe, if you want to get a big play down once again, maybe you play a little bit pre-game, stay under that limit, that red flag limit. I think you're a little less likely to get barred. I know people are going to chime in and say, look, they'll limit you in-game betting as well. Now, the house edge is bigger. You're talking about maybe a 30-cent line, but that also gives you some opportunity, maybe, play a little bit less pre-game, play more in-game. Maybe that's another way to keep your accounts open. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it was actually an in-game bet that I think got our group, had the eye on us. I think it was Houston. Houston fell down to, I want to say it was NC State. This was a second-round tournament game, and we all looked at each other like, Houston's coming back and winning this game. We all just bum rushed, the counter, and the guy was tapping his foot like, oh no, we've made a mistake. And after that, our next bet, we were told, no, not that much, guys. But in-game betting, because obviously they have to react so quickly, right? I mean, so they don't have time to really think about it. So if you could just pounce on it, you can get the bet in before they even realize, oh my God, this guy's really sharp. He knows what he's doing, and we just took a lot of money, and he's going to win. So that's the thing. I mean, the books are on their toes a little bit more with the in-game wagering. Certainly when you are just watching a game live, you can walk right up to the counter because you love the odds based on that a team's getting to come back. So yeah, I agree. In-game wagering is one way to always have an edge if you know what you're doing.
And I'll kind of come back full circle here and finish this off with, we started about the beginning, the negative of having 30-plus sports books now in different states, and it's legalized as a big market. One of the other questions a few weeks ago was the future of sports betting 5 or 10 years. And this is the negative future where everyone's getting limited. They just want public money. They don't want any sharp money. But I do think the light at the end of the tunnel, the bright spot, what I'm hoping happens, and I come back once again, I mentioned the financial markets. I think there's still an opportunity once the public becomes more educated the next 5 or 10 years to have an exchange traded type system like we have over in Europe and in Asia, where it's buyer versus buyer. The house takes just a small 1% edge with no risk, and we have more of a market. I'm hoping maybe the in-game betting is leading more towards that with all that volume, because you need a lot of volume and you need a sophisticated betting marketplace, which we don't quite have yet with all these novices. But when they come to realize you can't lay 25, 30-cent baseball lines and win, maybe that'll become more appealing. So let's hope this leads to a international, or at least a U.S. version of the betting marketplace, and we no longer have to worry about being barred. But it's a great question from Barry. And once again, please chime in with daily questions here for the BS segment, handicapping betting questions in general, and we will get to them here on the show. Brian Power, a great Monday show. It's a quiet Monday. MLB Home Run Derby tonight. I might actually have some plays on that. I'm looking at it as we speak. If anything is up, it'll be $9 Monday. So check out my page, Steve Merrill, WagerTalk.com. And Brian, what do you have going on this week? I know it's $9 Monday. Anything planned in the off sports? I know you do soccer as well, not just baseball for you.
Yeah, obviously this being my first day in the big kids chair, I was busy preparing for this and then put all my energy in that. I hope I didn't run anyone off, but because I'll be back tomorrow, whether you like it or not. But, you talk about the home run derby. This is not a play I have on my page, but I was actually doing some spare reading before we went on. I think I like Rodriguez over Alonso in the first round of that home run derby a lot.
Nice.
I mean, he's hitting at his home park, obviously. So that's something that I think I may be getting down on here tonight because what else am I going to do? Otherwise.
Well, and look, Alonso's got to be a little bit of a public play, right? He wins the thing the first 2 years he's in it, basically. And he's also been out. He was out for about a month, and really, really talented player. He gets lost in the Aaron Judge shadow, but if he was the other guy in New York, if Judge wasn't in New York, he'd be the most probably famous guy other than Ohtani in baseball. Real talent. But we'll see how healthy he is, right? And there's a lot of, like you said, probably some public money on him as well. So little free home run derby from Brian Power. Look how he snuck that in right as we're heading out. I love it. And tomorrow is Tuesday, MLB All-Star Games. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk maybe a little bit about the All-Star Game. We'll also have a first in WagerTalk.com history, a little teaser for tomorrow's show. It's $2 Tuesday. We've got a twist on it tomorrow, Brian. It's the first time it's happened 5-6+ years that they've been doing $2 Tuesday. So that alone is a reason to tune in tomorrow on Tuesday, and you get to see Steve Merrill, Brian Power one more time. Brian, looking forward to doing the show with you tomorrow. Take us home.
Yeah, I don't know what else there's to say. Steve, we all know you are one of the consummate professionals in this industry. Everyone at Wager Talk, everyone watching. Hopefully, I did nothing to tarnish your vaunted reputation here in the last 45 minutes. All right. That's one down, baby.
We'll do it again tomorrow. So noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Leave comments below. Leave us a BS question for tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow. Enjoy the home run derby tonight. We'll talk again tomorrow, noon Eastern on Tuesday.